Good evening, everyone, and welcome for today's second pre-symposium session. The topic for today's session is integration of mixed methods in contemporary research. And the speaker for today's session is Professor S Ashok. So I welcome you, sir, for the session.
Thank you.
Let me introduce Professor Ashok, sir.
Okay. Okay. So, good evening to everyone. I think I will, So share some of my thoughts on mixed methods, why mixed methods in research, especially in social science and management and etc. So this particular mixed method has a technical term called as triangulation. So triangulation in research, how triangulation is brought in, what is the relevance of it, what are the different types of triangulation that is possible, or a mixed method that is possible, and then what are the precautions that we need to take into consideration, what are the merits and demerits, and then how exactly triangulation can be made. I think these are some of the, let us say, points which I would be discussing today. Okay. So to start with, let us have a small, introduction to the process of research and then the current status of research, especially social science research and management research, and then what exactly is happening in the research, and that acts as a prelude for the need for mixed method or a need for the triangulation component is concerned. Now, when we talk in terms of the process of research, there are several, let us say, stages in research. So the steps that are involved in the research is, we go with certain assumptions or hypotheses. So we identify a problem, and based on the problem, we write the objectives and hypotheses. And based on the hypothesis, we also design a study, whether it is a correlation study, whether it is a experimental study, or whether it is the different types of research. So based on the type of a hypothesis and the objectives, we decide on the design of the study. When once we design on the study, then one of the important component of the design is nature of the sample. What type of the sample, what should be the size of the sample, and what should be the representation of the sample. So relationship between population, universe population and sample biases, sample errors. So those are the factors that determine that we need to look into before we start the research is concerned. Then we have, when once the design and the sample is clear, then we think in terms of how to collect the data. Okay, so data collection becomes an important factor. There are different methods of data collection. So qualitative techniques and quantitative techniques of collecting data would be there. When once we collect the data, now that particular data, we try to treat the data. Okay, so there are, fortunately now, we have lots of softwares that are available, both for quantitative analysis as well as the qualitative analysis or the qualitative treatment of the data. When once the treatment of the data is done, we try to, let us say, prove the hypothesis, accept the hypothesis or the reject the hypothesis. And also we support it by what is the rationale, what is whether the acceptance or rejection of the hypothesis is being supported by earlier studies, or whether based on our own understanding while dealing with the respondents, while collecting the data, we try to justify, we try to write, interpret, discuss the results that we have found based on the treatment of the data is concerned. Now, what is the current status of and the future directions for research? The first one is that the overemphasis on methodology. Now, this is one of the important components. Though methodology is important, what is the relevance of that particular methodology also tend to depend upon the, say, for example, I normally used to say, in a typical, academic, research or the manner in which the academic research dissertation or a thesis is being presented. You will have an introduction chapter, and then you will have a review of literature. Then you have a methodology chapter, then result discussion, etc. Now, this methodology will help in designing, in actually giving you a framework based on which you have to conduct and you have to, let's say, continue with your research is concerned. Now, of late, what is happening? This methodology puts you a blinker. Just like a horse is put, on both the sides of the eyes, the blinkers are put so that the distraction would not be there. So the focus would be there. So the primary objective of methodology is to have this particular focus of doing the research, because there are lots of deviations that are possible. Lot of other factors can come in the process of research. So you should not be disturbed. You should not be distracted by that. That's why the methodology becomes an important factor. One of the important aspect of methodology is the hypothesis, and what exactly you want to examine, verify, it becomes an important factor. Of late, what is happening, especially in the university setup, the research is done in the university setup. There are a lot of researchers find it difficult to accept the fact that if a hypothesis has to be rejected based on your results or based on your treatment of the data, there is a fear, or there is an apprehension that our thesis may be rejected. So normally what happens is, at the time of synopsis, though you prepare a synopsis methodology, afterwards, once you collect the data and treatment of the data is done, then in order to prove the hypothesis, you rewrite the methodology so that the hypothesis that is framed is being accepted. So that's where the overemphasis on methodology is a factor that need to be actually keyed down, and how to handle that becomes an important factor. The second one, the scope of the research being restricted by the type of the research. Now, when you take a research, right, if you say, for example, your primary idea is to find out the relationship between the, let us say, the variables of your study, the scope of your study is restricted only to the, let us say, the finding out the relationship. And in the process, you may find a lot of other factors that is influencing, and you will not be giving importance to that at all. So the scope of the research being restricted by the type of the research is concerned, whether it is exploratory research or field survey, or whether it is a predictive research, etc. So depending on the type of the research, your scope of the research is also being restricted. The third component would be ignorant about other possible approaches to study, understand and analyze the problem, and interpret the result. I give a simple example. Say, for example, you are interested to understand the impact of poverty on the, let us say, the community or on the society is concerned. Now, poverty is a multidisciplinary phenomenon, or a multi-dimensional phenomenon. Now, if you are a student of sociology, you will be studying poverty from the sociological perspective. If you are a student of economics, you will be studying poverty in the framework of economic aspect of its concern. If you are studying poverty from a psychological perspective, your approach to understand poverty is only in terms of the psychological dimension is concerned. But the impact of poverty on the community is a resultant of, or is being influenced by, socio-economic, psychological, and even maybe political factors that determine. Let's say, for example, now when you have, say, the guarantee phenomenon that is concerned. Now, what can happen to the, let us say, the poverty component is concerned. So this is where, to understand the real problem, the real problem would be in terms of understanding the poverty and its impact on the community. This multidisciplinary component becomes an essential factor. Whereas in most of the present situation, researchers are ignorant about the other possible approaches to the study is concerned. Now, this is one. That is the reason why there is a need for mixed method models, or in other words, it's also called as triangulation. Now, what is triangulation? Why triangulation? And then we will go into different types of triangulation. Now, why triangulation? Triangulation or pluralism both tend to support interdisciplinary approach. Just now, as I said, many of our social phenomenon, right, is influenced or is being determined by several factors, several disciplinary factors, rather than only one. Okay, so as a result of which, triangulation will help in getting the support for interdisciplinary approach to the understanding of the phenomenon is concerned, and to achieve innovation of conceptual frameworks. Now, when you develop a particular theory, now say, for example, coming from a psychology background, even say from a community perspective, socio-economic aspect is concerned, happiness becomes an important factor. There is several studies, periodically done on World Happiness Index, which are the countries that are more happier than that, and that's where we find that the happiness of let us say from among the let us say world is concerned, India stands around 139, whereas Pakistan is much ahead of let us say in terms of happiness, that comes under around 37 or 38. Now look at in reality, when you look at happiness among the Indian population and happiness among the let us say other countries are concerned, so the parameters that are used to determine to understand the happiness, to measure the happiness itself is totally different. So that is where the conceptual framework of how exactly we need to look into happiness, this innovation would be possible by using the multi-method or triangulation is concerned. And triangulation often leads to multi-perspective meta-interpretation. Okay. Now, when I say, for example, triangulation or multi-method, probably in the coming slides, we will be discussing about during the process of research, whichever stages, in what all the stages you can use the multi-method, that's where this particular meta-interpretations also becomes an important factor. So meta means beyond. So your study would have focused on a particular approach is concerned. Probably, researchers in the field of behavioral science or social science know about it. In the sense, when you are collecting the data, suppose, for example, in most of the social science research, you collect the demographic details, right? So you have information about, let us say, their caste, their religion, their age, their marital status, lot of such variables you would be collecting. Okay. But in the process of, let us say, treatment of the data or the objectives of your research, you would not have focused on that particular aspect itself. You would have restricted your analysis only to the predominant variables or of your study is concerned. But while analyzing, the tabulation of the data, or while analyzing the data, you may find a particular pattern that would not have been in the scope of your study in the earlier. This is where we talk in terms of, let us say, post hoc analysis is concerned. So that may play a significant role in understanding the real information or the real phenomenon of a particular research problem is concerned. So that's where you say meta-interpretation is possible. Multi-perspective would be possible when you use triangulation or the multi-method is concerned. Now, when you say triangulation, when you say triangle, there are three sides of the triangle. Which are the three edges of the triangle, and how does these three edges of the triangle help in understanding a real phenomenon or a research problem is concerned? Okay. So the three edges of the triangle are the empiricism, the realism, and the constructionalism. So these are the three edges of a triangle of viewpoints. Now, what do you mean by that? Empiricism. What do you mean by empiricism? Empirically, you collect the data, first-hand information, primary data is collected. And what does that particular primary data tell you about? Because suppose, for example, when I talk about, let us say, I was giving an example of, let us say, happiness, or when I say, for example, economic aspect of, say, for example, poverty itself is concerned. Now, poverty maybe in the 1900, poverty in 2000, poverty in 2024. There may be several reports on the poverty. Okay. So whatever that was prevailing then, it may give you only an indicator. But in 2024 or in 2000 or 21st century, that particular data that is being used then may not be appropriate, may not be relevant here at all. That's where you may have to collect the data now. That's where empiricism is one such angle of a or edge of a triangle is concerned. So you collect the data primarily and then maybe through interviews, through questionnaires, or through focus group discussion. There are different methods or the techniques that is used to collect the data. So empiricism is one. Realism is another factor. Now, what do you mean by realism? Realistic in the sense pragmatic. What is really possible, what exactly is a reality is a factor. So there are several factors. Probably this is where when I say empirically you collect the data, that empirical data may may come out with a fact that whatever the assumptions you had may not be hold true at all. So what happens now? You need not have to say that you need not have to feel shy that you may have to reject the data, because what is reality is that based on the empirical data, you may have to reject that particular data. Reality is different from what it is. Now, I was just giving an example of some time back. Can we accept that Indians are very low in their happiness compared to other countries are concerned? So what is the realistic component there? The realistic component would be the parameters that are used to measure happiness may not be appropriate, may not be correct, may not be relevant to measure the happiness across the globe is concerned. So different countries use different parameters, and that's where so realistic information is totally different. Realism is another factor. So you empirically collect the data, and then you state what exactly is a real phenomenon is about. And then you also have constructionism is the third edge of the triangle. What do you mean by constructionism? See, when you talk in terms of research, especially in social science research, now you say, for example, development of a theory may become an important factor. How do you construct a theory? How do you identify different variables and put into a particular framework? So what happens now, this is where probably when you say quantitative, let us say, approach or quantitative study, now we find off late in most of the, let us say, the empirical approach to the research, uh, try to make use of, let us say, for example, no matter what field, what subject you are doing, you talk in terms of SEM, structured equation model, so that whatever the phenomenon you study, you make out of, you try to develop a particular model, and you try to that particular developed model has to be or has a opportunity of being tested again or validated again, and etc. That's where you are constructing. So the three edges of a triangle are empiricism, realism, and constructionism are the three edges of a triangular concept. Now, each can offer a philosophical starting point for research, and the realist approach is the one that best fits a mixed method research methodology. So you are actually emphasizing on what exactly is the real phenomenon is a factor. Triangulation across the qualitative and quantitative divide is only consistent with a pluralist theoretical viewpoint. Now, what do you mean by this? See, you need not have to say, for example, one of the, let us say, phenomenon which we find now when you are a research is being done, overemphasis either on quantitative or on qualitative we find. So this particular factor, a research in order to understand, or when you're talking about realistic phenomenon, in order to do that, there is a need for having both qualitative as well as the quantitative component becomes an essential factor. Now, a simple example, for example, when you say constructivism, how exactly constructivism is possible? How do you construct? Now, this is a small example of a social construction of the news. Now, probably during the COVID time, a joke was there in the sense, anytime, every time, any channel which you, let us say, switch on, lots of information about the death, lots of information about all those negative factors that were there. And that's where people said that in order to be happy, what you should do would be turn your TV to the wall side. Okay, so that, so when the news come in, there are different channels, there are different sources from where this particular news can come in. And then the constructionism of the news can be possible from various directions that you can find here. So this is where constructivistic component is there. You find lot of information, lot of factors that come in, and from those particular factors, you try to construct a theory, you try to construct a story out of this particular, let us say, the findings that which you have made. So in a qualitative research, say, for example, if you use grounded theory or phenomenological approach to the research, so the data is very is not that important. From the data, you have to construct a theory. So this is where it becomes an important component or an interesting component in qualitative research. So social constructionism or constructivism is a phenomenon which we can find. Similarly, we have a realism. Okay, empiricism, I think, is everybody is clear about. So realism refers to, it is drawn from two words, res and ism. That's where objective reflection of a particular phenomenon. So your personal biases doesn't come in. It believes that the world is composed of a matter rather than ideas. Okay, it believes the world is made by real substantial material entities. So what exactly is real, that has to be brought out through your research, and the ideas expressed in the symbols of the material world. So that's a factor, and it gives more emphasis on utilization of the real world. So whatever you are finding, your finding should be more realistic. So you come out with a conclusion which others will not accept it, will not say that whatever you say is not true, then the whole purpose of your research is meaningless, or let us say it becomes not meaningful at all, appropriate at all. So realism refers to that particular approach is concerned. Now, some of the, let us say, definitions of, let us say, multi-method or triangulation, or first one, Denzin was the first one to, let us say, come out with the concept of triangulation, using multiple sources to converge on the truth. So what exactly is the reality? Now, that's where realism, the truth, in order to identify the truth, multiple sources are used to converge. So that convergence will give you the truth. So that's where triangulation is a technique that uses multiple sources to converge on the truth. Cohen and Marion in 2002 defines triangulation or the multi-method as the use of two or more methods of data collection in the study of some aspect of human behavior. Okay, so we are understanding a social phenomenon or a human behavior, and in that particular process, we use two or more methods of data collection. Okay, or it combines independent yet complementary research methods. Now look at this particular component now. So what do you mean by that? Combines independent. So you use one particular method, that particular method is independent, yet complementary research methods. Now, say for example, in a empirical research, right, or in a quantitative research, you would be analyzing using a statistical methods or a statistical techniques, which would definitely help us in drawing a conclusion, whether that particular conclusion is acceptable at a confidence level, or whether that tend to depend upon whether that particular understanding or your finding is applicable to a larger majority. Now that's where you say 95% or 99% significant level, you say, okay, but there are extremes that are there. So outliers you talk about. Now, holding other things constant, if you have controlled everything, and then it is applicable to 95% or 95 incidences, it is applicable, but 5, it is not applicable. Now, what does it mean? You have taken all control, despite it, these 5 individuals or 5% is not matching with the others. So why is it so? Now that becomes an interesting component that is there. So what do you do now? You are using a questionnaire, you are using, let us say, a tool to collect the data, and you have found this is what the majority applies. Now, that need to be supplemented. Now, I was talking about meta-analysis, right? So go back, make use of a focus group discussion or an in-depth interview by taking into consideration these outliers. So some of the outliers, you collect them, interview them. Now, why is it that your results seems to be different from others? So that would give you an idea, when you're talking about realism, that particular realism can be more acceptable when you use this. So shows the richness and complexity of behavior by studying theories from more than one standpoint. That's one factor. And it is a way to make sure there is enough evidence to make valid claims. So it's not just that hypothesis is accepted, but on what grounds, on what basis, on what evidence you are making that particular, let us say, conclusion is valid. So these are some of the characteristic features of a triangulation is concerned. Triangulation, there are two major types of triangulation which you can find. One is a simultaneous triangulation, and another is sequential triangulation. Now, as the name itself says, simultaneous. Simultaneously, across the different stages of your research, you can make use of triangulation. So that's where you are doing a research. So at the time of data collection, at the time of your review of literature, at the time of let us say analysis, etc., etc. So simultaneously, you would be using the triangulation, or it can be sequential. So at each stage or at what stage you use the triangulation. So broadly, triangulation can broadly be categorized into simultaneous triangulation and sequential triangulation. And triangulation can be methodological triangulation. Now, what do you mean by that? Now, just now, some time back, I was giving an example of different methods are being used. So you use interview method, you use questionnaire method, you use, you also make use of focus group discussion. So the method. So you can make use of qualitative methods. You can also make use of quantitative methods during your research is concerned. So this is where you talk in terms of methodological triangulation. Okay. So again, this methodological triangulation can also be thought of simultaneously during the process of research, or it can be sequential also. So this is where you talk in terms of methodological triangulation is concerned. The next one is time triangulation. Okay. Now, what do you mean by time triangulation? Now, you are, I was giving an example of, let us say, in the field of economics or in the field of management, a particular trend analysis you talk about. Now, when you doing a trend analysis, now to what extent, over a period of time. Now, somebody was, saying, for example, quite often we find that, especially with regard to, let us say, inflation is concerned, especially with regard to the pricing phenomenon is concerned. Now, people tend to say that, when, let us say, during pre-independent or immediately after independence, with a little amount of money that was there, we used to, the buying behavior was, purchasing behavior or purchasing power was much more. But now, even when we get, let us say, 3-figure or 4-figure or 5-figure, salary also, we are not able to get that. Now, if you look at the cross-sectional or longitudinal or time analysis, time triangulation is concerned, what is the, when you make a cost-benefit analysis then and now, we may find the otherwise, the figures may tell you totally a different factor is concerned. So time triangulation refers to when you are doing a longitudinal study. So across the generation, over the generation, over a period of time, decades can be. So this becomes a time triangulation component is concerned. So you may be doing a particular study now, but you try to, this may be true only to this particular time frame, or whether that is also being found true with regard to the earlier generation, or what is likely to happen in the future generation. So this is where you talk in terms of time triangulation component is concerned. The next one is observer or the investigator triangulation. Now, when you do a larger survey research is concerned, so you don't have only one observer or one investigator. So you may make use of different investigators or multiple observers or multiple investigators. And this is where you try to triangulate, you try to collect the data or pool the information collected from different observers or different investigators are concerned. So this is where you talk in terms of observer or investigator triangulation is concerned. The next you have, say, for example, theory triangulation. Now, with regard to a particular phenomenon, I was giving an example of poverty. Okay. So there are sociological theories, there are economic theories, there are political theories, and there are psychological theories, or there are behavioral theories. So there are different theories on a particular phenomenon is concerned. As I told you, say, for example, poverty itself. So theory triangulation refers to, now you combine the, let us say, socio-political, psychological theory, and then try to understand a particular phenomenon. Okay, so during a particular type of, let us say, the government, and say, for example, taking into consideration the rural and the urban component is concerned, and then also you say, for example, the psychological happiness component or the living conditions as a factor. So putting all these three. So political theory talks about the governance. The sociological theory talks about the urban-rural component is concerned. The living condition talks about more in terms of a behavioral component is concerned. So when you combine all these three and try to integrate your methodology, your research in terms of these three, probably theory in triangulation is possible. So this is the theory triangulation. Then you have space triangulation. Okay. So when you say space triangulation, this is the geographical or let us say the physical spaces that are there. Okay. So again, when you talk in terms of now, say for example, the culture itself may tend to vary from one nation to the other, or as you move from one part of the globe to the other, the phenomenon the phenomenon you are studying may be the same, but the manner in which that particular phenomenon operates, when you're talking about realism, the reality of that particular phenomenon on the population may vary from one country to the other or one geographical area to the other. So space triangulation refers to this particular factor. Now, I'm tempted to give this particular example. If space triangulation is not made, what is likely to happen? In one of the, let us say now, from taking a example from a psychological research, see, now we find that everybody is concerned about the stress, bothered about the stress. And whenever there is a stress, individuals make use of certain coping mechanisms. Now, these coping mechanisms, an individual make use of a particular coping technique. And then by using this particular coping technique, the individual would be able to manage this. So there are several scales, there are several questionnaires which tend to measure what type of coping an individual make use of. There is one particular, when you make, say, for example, a coping technique was developed in a Western country, and one of the one of the item in the coping technique would be, is there any increase in the consumption of coffee? Okay. Now, in the Western population or the Western culture, consumption of coffee has been considered as one of the effective coping mechanisms. Okay, so because that acts as a stimulant and then your mood swing tend to take place, etc. Okay, now when you use the same item here on an Indian population, is there in the recent past, is there any increase in the consumption of coffee? Here, every time is a coffee time. If an individual is a highly sociable, he would have just gone for a cup of coffee and come back. And meantime, while he's returning his own colleague or some other person, do you mind joining me for a cup of coffee? The individual will again go and say. And when he is answering this particular question, is there any, in this past 6 months, is there any increase in the consumption of coffee? The person may say yes, but that is in no way a coping technique the individual would be using to deal with the stress is concerned. So this is where space triangulation becomes an essential factor. Geographical factors may have to be taken into consideration. So that's where space triangulation refers to. Combined levels of triangulation is another component. So at different levels, you tend to make use of different, let us say, methods for the purpose of the research is concerned. So this is the combined levels of triangulation is concerned. Now let us spend some time on these particular components. Methodological triangulation. A theory is investigated using a variety of experimental and non-experimental methods. So as I said, methodology, there is an experimental method, there is a non-experimental method. So both you combine. So a theory is investigated using a variety of experimental and non-experimental methods. So probably in social science, one of the purpose of the research would be to validate or investigate a theory that has been formed. So theory that is being formed need to be validated. So you conduct a research in order to validate the theory. For validating the theory, you make use of experimental and non-experimental. So this is where I use, when you say experimental, empirical I was talking about, and then non-experimental, that is where the constructivistic and the realistic approach becomes an important factor. So methodological triangulation refers to this aspect. A multi-method approach that is different from the single method approach found in the historical studies. So in methodological triangulation, it's, as I just said, multi-method is being used rather than a single method. and single method verification is limited. Why methodological triangulation? Is because using a single method, verification of the hypothesis or the investigation of the theory gets limited because you don't have the other perspective is concerned. Now, as I was just saying, it may be true with regard to 90%, but if it is not, what about the 10%? If that 10% also may become an important factor. With that, especially in social science, we talk about the confidence level, 5%, 10%. But in social research, even 10% would not be there because a lot of chance factors, a lot of other factors, extraneous factors influence a phenomenon. And if that cannot be controlled at all. So when it is not controlled, your conclusion have a lot of chance factors that is influencing. That's where if you use a single method, the verification of your hypothesis becomes limited, becomes restricted. So that's where the methodological triangulation. Time triangulation. Some research is only gathered during a specific time period. Now, probably when you're talking about time triangulation, now one raw fertile area of research for every field, for example, nowadays is, let us say, COVID, pre-COVID, post-COVID component is concerned. So that is where a specific time period becomes an important factor. Now, suppose, for example, when you're talking about the pandemic, right? What exactly is happening during the pandemic play an important role. Pandemic is not something new. Earlier times also pandemic was there. So cholera was there, plague was there, etc. But how exactly people reacted, responded, and what was its consequence on the mass was totally different from what happened during the COVID component is concerned. So this is where you find some research is only gathered during a specific time period, and time triangulation ensures that the time frame of the study is not the reason for the result. Okay, look at this particular component. So time triangulation ensures that the time frame of the study is not the reason for the result. So it's not that only because of this particular time, the result has been obtained here. So it ensures that the time frame of the study is not the reason for the result. So it is nothing to do with the time factor is concerned. So what is common there has to be identified. So time triangulation refers to that. Cross-sectional triangulation is another factor. Data gathered at one time across the ages and longitudinal data gathered over time, studies provide triangulation. So that means, as I said, so when you talk in terms of pandemic itself, what was the condition there at the time of plague, at the time of cholera, at the time of COVID, at the time of, So this is where you talk in terms of cross-sectional or data gathered at one time across the ages is a factor that helps in the triangulation component is concerned. So time triangulation refers to that. Then you have observer or the investigator triangulation. So when you have observer triangulation is when different researchers study a topic independently and find similar results. Now look at this particular component. Okay, so different researchers study a topic independently. So there is no, before this, there is no contact at all. So I would be doing a study on a particular problem, and another person in another university or in another place also would have conducted the same study. And then we try to combine and then see whether we find similar results or not. Okay, so that's where the realism becomes an important factor. So what do you mean by that? That's where when you talk in terms of observer or the different researchers, I would have studied the same phenomenon. Another person also would have studied the same phenomenon using the same methodology or a different methodology. When we put these two together, now what happens now? The differences, similarity can be understood so that the reality or the realism can be, objective of realism can be achieved here. So that's where you talk in terms of observer triangulation is concerned. When independent raters in content analysis research are used and you correlate inter-rater reliability between the observations, you establish as an observer triangulation. Now, suppose, for example, you collect the data based on the judges. So 2 or 3 or a panel of judges are there. So what is the opinion of the different judges is a factor so that observer triangulation can be possible. So inter-rater reliability. I also rate and another judge also rates. what is the correlation between the two? Similarity between the two becomes an important factor. So this is what is called as observer or investigator triangulation. Then you have what is called as theory triangulation. Now, as the name itself says, two or more theories are combined to create a more comprehensive theory. Okay, so a particular phenomenon, as I was giving an example, say, for example, if I am to study the impact of poverty on the society or a community is concerned, so I find that if the purpose is to arrive at a policy to upgrade or policy to overcome the poverty of a society is concerned or of a community is concerned, maybe a political theory and a sociological theory may become more important. What does the political theory has to say about poverty? What does the sociological theory has to say about the poverty? And those theoretical constructs or theoretical correlates are put together. Probably the finding would be more comprehensive to understand the socio-political impact or the dimensions of poverty of a particular community or a particular country is concerned. So this is what is called as the theory triangulation is concerned. Space triangulation, I think as I have already told you, by studying a theory in different cultures and finding similar results, you have the space triangulation. So many of human behavior or socio-psychological phenomena, and even the political and economic aspects are there, may vary from one culture to the other. So by studying a theory in different cultures, how does it operate, or how does it, what exactly the impact of that particular theory in different cultures will help in space triangulation, or space triangulation helps in understanding a particular phenomenon across different cultures out there. So it may be more suitable, it may be more realistic in one particular culture. It may not be so in another culture is concerned. So theory may be there. The validity of the theory, application of the theory tend to be influenced or tend to be restricted based on its cultural dimensions or cultural aspect is concerned. Culture is an important variable in determining the cause of the behavior. Okay, so when we say, for example, social science or behavioral science, behavior play an important role, and one of the cause for behavior or behavioral changes is the culture. So the culture determines the way in which the person reacts and interacts and performs a particular way of behavior. So that particular way of behavior is being influenced by one's culture. Now, this is a very challenging factor because now with the globalization, liberalization coming in, there's a lot of cross-cultural issues, acculturation issues that are coming up. And then this is where there is a need for multi-method or a triangulation of a research is concerned. Because especially when you want to make a study, now especially when you collect the data, when you conduct the study in a metropolitan or an urban or tier 1, tier 2 cities are concerned, there is a lot of cross-cultural issues that are there, and these cross-cultural issues becomes a very important factor in understanding a particular behavior is concerned. I remember, some time back when I think during the late 90s, when the BPO sector came in, call centers and BPO sectors came in, lot of let us say assumptions, lot of let us say ideas came in as to while to understand and to motivate and to increase the happiness of the BPO workers. Okay, so lots of theories came in. So somebody said that workstation, and somebody said that compartmentalization. Somebody said no. So all these may not have any validity component is concerned. That's where you may have to look into the cultural factors have to be taken into consideration. This is what is called as the space triangulation is concerned. Combined levels of triangulation. Okay. So the different levels that must be combined to achieve triangulation are the individual, interactive level of the group, and the larger collective group or the society is concerned. Now, what do you mean by this? Different levels that must be combined to achieve triangulation. So you have collected the data from an individual is concerned. Now, suppose, for example, you want to study a particular organization is concerned, okay, a behavior of an organization or organizational performance, for example. So the individual here refers to a particular organization from where you have collected the data. That may not be completely true of the entire sector of that particular organization is concerned. So that is where the individual refers to one particular organization. Interactive level of the group. So when you take different organizations or multiple organizations, then what happens is certain amount of reality, certain amount of the real phenomenon can come in, and then you have to extend it on to the larger collective or a higher level of the society level is concerned. So combined levels of triangulation refers to you use a micro level, and from a micro level you move on to the macro level concept is called individual, interactive, or the multi-group or inter-group, and then you also have a larger collective or an organization level or a society level is concerned. So the theories with the most triangulation conduct research at all the three levels. Okay, so if the purpose of your research is to examine or verify a particular theory, probably multi-level or the three levels of triangulation becomes an important factor. Now let us come to effectiveness of triangulation. What are the factors that determine the effectiveness of triangulation? The first one, effectiveness of triangulation depends upon research questions must be clearly focused. What exactly is your research question? Okay, you have a statement of the research problem, and from that particular problem, what exactly is your focus should be clearly stated. So when you have multiple questions, then what is the rationale, what is the purpose, why, on what basis you have framed these questions becomes an important factor. So research question or research questions must be clearly focused. It should have a definite focus. Strengths and weaknesses of each chosen method must complement each other. Now, what do you mean by that? Now, I was just saying that in a let's say, multi-method or single method research is done, you would be ignorant of the other methods or the advantage or merits of the other methods that are there. So each method of data collection or each method which you use has its own strengths and weaknesses. So you should know, if I use a questionnaire, suppose, for example, normally we make use of a questionnaire, and I have come across, especially in a management or in commerce and management and some sociological, let us say, research is concerned, you collect the data using a questionnaire, and the questionnaire may have only, say, for example, yes or no, or true or false, or maybe, say, for example, the responses are obtained in terms of two dimensions or two or three aspects is concerned. Okay. Now, when you have only the questionnaire, or we call it as what is called as a closed type questionnaire. When you use a closed type questionnaire, the person may say yes, the person may say no, but the S may convey different meaning to respondent one. The same meaning may not be there with regard to the respondent two is concerned. Okay, so that is where there is a limitation of the method of, let us say, a questionnaire or a closed type questionnaire. So in order to overcome that, now you may have to make use of some other method. Now, when you say multiple method, you use an interview, you use a focus group discussion, etc. So that's where strength and, so if you use only the focus group discussion, let us say you are doing a qualitative research and you use only a focus group discussion. When you use a focus group discussion, you should know what are the limitations of the focus group discussion. Okay, then these limitations of focus group discussion, how to overcome that? Is there another technique, another method that I may have to make use of? Okay, so this is a strengths and weaknesses of each chosen method must complement each other. So you know the strength of interview and you know the limitations of the interview. In order to overcome the limitation of the interview, you use a questionnaire or the vice versa. So this is where strengths and weaknesses of each chosen method must complement each other. Data collection methods should be selected according to their relevance to the nature of the phenomenon being studied. Now, this point I have already repeatedly telling you. data collection methods, whether you use questionnaire, whether you use interviews, whether you use survey, whether you use focus group discussion, right? There are different methods of data collection. Okay. So that data collection method should be relevant to the nature of the phenomenon being studied. Now, there is say, for example, you say, if you use, say, for example, rating scale is being used. When you use a rating scale, what is likely to happen? Now, I was giving an example of strength and weaknesses of the technique. So when you use a rating scale, there is always a certain set of biases that can come in. Okay, there is a, say, for example, error of leniency, error of extremity, okay, error of central tendency. So what do you mean by that? When you ask an opinion of an individual, suppose, for example, you are studying the organizational climate or perception of employees about management. Okay, you use a Likert scale. Now, normally, despite the fact that you say that your responses are kept confidential and it would not be revealed to anybody, employees have their own reservation. So when you use a 5-point scale, strongly agree to strongly disagree, somewhere in between cannot decide or undecided or neutral, most likely individuals are likely to give response neutral. Okay, I can't say. Then what will happen now? You would have collected the data, but for the purpose of analysis or discussion is concerned, if most of the respondents say that cannot decide or neutral, the whole purpose of research is defeated. So that's where you should know, what else or what are the other methods that you may have to make use of for the purpose of this particular study is concerned. Okay, that's an important factor. So if you want to understand, let us say a case study method is used. When do you use a case study method? What is the relevance application of that particular factor? Okay, so you want to understand the problem of within a particular organization is concerned. So there, if you use a survey, if you use a questionnaire, that may not be relevant at all. Case analysis becomes an important factor. Case method may be more relevant under such circumstances than a questionnaire or an empirical method is concerned. So that's the second factor that we need to look into. A continual evaluation of the approach should be undertaken during the study. Now, I was giving an example of simultaneous and sequential triangulation. So, continual evaluation of the approach, irrespective of whether you're using simultaneous or sequential. Okay, why I am using it, if I am using this particular method, in what way this method is useful is helping me in understanding or in fulfilling the objective of the study. So continuous evaluation of the approaches that you are doing. So if you are doing questionnaire, if you are using let's say I've talked about the different types of let us say triangulation. If it is a methodological triangulation, if it is observer triangulation, or if it is, say, depending on that, you have to see whether that is, say, for example, one of the component would be, you are doing a review of literature. Now, if you want to do a review of literature, there are, depending on the subject matter. So what is the back date you need to take into consideration? Is it 10 years? Is it 20 years? Is it 50 years? Is it 100 years? Now, there are lots of archives that are available to provide information about that. So you should be very clear or very, very clear about what is the time frame I should look into in order to understand the reality now. Okay, so that is where continual evaluation of the approach should be undertaken during the process of that. So that's one factor. Okay, now what are the let us say advantages of triangulation? Okay, first one, the primary advantage of triangulation is that it reduces experimental bias. So when you use a single method, there is a lot of scope for the researcher's bias. I am using experimental method because I know I want to have control over that. It is possible for me to, let us say, have control over the variables and then study. If I am using a survey method, so researcher or the experimenter has a lot of biases. And when you use multi-method, the researcher's bias can be reduced. This is one of the primary advantage. It gives a broader and complex causation model of behavior. Okay, now just as I was giving, one of the, let us say, the expectation of modern research, scientific research, is it possible for us to come out with a model, come out with a causation, come out with a prediction of a particular phenomenon is concerned? So it gives a broader and complex causation model of behavior. Okay, so that's another advantage because it takes multiple perspective so that you know what is the role, what is the effect of each one of these factors influencing the phenomenon. Now, when I was saying, for example, if you take the same old example of poverty, if you use a multi-method, okay, so you know poverty, what exactly is the role of political influence or a political governance factor causing the poverty component is concerned. So certain people are always kept poor. Okay, that's because of let us say various voting or other components that are concerned. So how much of it is contributing to the poverty is a factor. Okay, so similarly, the sociological, psychological factors. So it gives a broader and complex causation model. So this is another advantage of triangulation is concerned. Then you have it reduces method-bound theories, and many historical theories lack methodological triangulation. So you said so because I use one particular method, and when theory is being influenced by the method of study that is being used, so that particular limitation can be reduced or avoided by that. That's an advantage of triangulation, and it reduces culture-bound theories, meaning that some theories are based on the observation of one culture. And when you say, I was giving an example of space triangulation. So space triangulation helps this particular component. So helps in avoiding or reducing the impact of the culture factors that are concerned. Continuing with the advantages of triangulation, advantages of each complement the other, resulting in a stronger research design and more valid and reliable findings are there. So when, say, for example, I was giving an example of you use a quantitative method, you arrive at a particular data, you arrive at a particular conclusion, and then you also take outliers. And when you take the outliers also, then you find to what extent there is a similarity or compatibility or the difference, why that particular difference is there. So you also say that to this extent it is applicable. These are the reasons, these are the factors where it is not applicable. So this is where stronger research design and more valid and reliable findings can be possible. That's another advantage of that. Then you have inadequacies of individual methods are minimized and threats to internal validity are realized and addressed. So this is another aspect of research multi-method is concerned. So inadequacies of individual methods. As I said, questionnaire has its own method limitation. Interview has its own limitation. So those threats to the internal validity can be minimized by that particular factor is concerned. Okay. So triangulation offers a balance between logic and stories. This is another factor, advantage. So there is a logic. Empiricism tells you, gives you the logical explanation to a particular phenomenon. The qualitative approach provides a supportive narration or a narrative for making into a particular story. See, your research should be, when we talk in terms of interpretation of research is concerned, research should not be a boredom or a monotonous component is concerned. So the findings of your research should be like a more story. So triangulation helps us in offering a balance between the logic and the story is concerned. Qualitative research, which emphasizes exploration, understanding, contextualizing, introspection, theory construction, etc., provides a strong base for wider aspects and quantitative measures, scaling, and generalization. So this is the advantage when you use the qualitative research is concerned. Similarly, when you use a quantitative research, and it emphasizes large sample, can provide an overview of an area that can reveal patterns, inconsistencies, and so forth, that can be further investigated with qualitative methods. So when you say triangulation or multi-method, you would be using qualitative as well as the quantitative. You know the merits and demerits of qualitative and quantitative, and triangulation helps in handling this particular component is concerned. However, there are certain limitations of triangulation is concerned. So what are the limitations of triangulation? So social reality is different from different perspectives and cannot be merged into a single truth. Look at this particular phenomenon. So far we are batting for triangulation, and now we find that social reality is different from different perspectives and cannot be merged into a single truth. So when I was talking in terms of, say, for example, all right, I think the example that comes to my mind now is that you find that now, the relevance of April 26th, right? Now, when you say voting pattern, what are the factors that influence a particular community or a particular individual or a community or a group, etc., or a caste or whatever that be in voting component is concerned? The reality may be totally different. Okay, the social reality can be totally be is different from the different perspectives. So you may say that there are several theories that come in. So anti-incumbent factor may influence, or the leader of a political party is an important factor, not the party. Others may say party is important, individual is not important. So there are several such explanations that are possible. But what is the social reality? If I look at only from the let us say political component is concerned, it may not be true at all. There is no single truth at all. Okay. Now, especially in an Indian democracy, especially during the time of elections, poll, what are the different factors that influence the winning and losing of a candidate or a past party is concerned? Now, this is a factor, limitation of triangulation. Caste, it involves amount of both in terms of money as well as in terms of time. Okay, so the cost and the resources is a factor. And then when you talk in terms of especially social phenomenon, there is endless options. Now, I gave an example of, let us say, poverty only from, let us say, political, social, economic, and psychological. There can be religious, there can be philosophical, there can be a lot of other factors that may influence the understanding the poverty is concerned. Okay, so there is no limit at all. So endless options are there, and it becomes difficult for you to decide on how much to take, how much to delete is a problem. And triangulation depends upon investigator skills. Okay, the researcher should be skillful enough to know when to use, what to use, how to use the different methods. Okay, this is where I was talking about sequential or simultaneous or multi-level or combined level. So investigators should be able to know, have specific skills that I have found this particular phenomenon. Now, suppose I was giving an example of 95 and let us say 99. Let us assume that there is no deviation at all. All let us say 99% or 99.9% will say will come out with one particular same answer. Can we accept that itself? Now, to give an example, suppose you want to. This is what happens in some of the studies are concerned. Suppose, for example, you want to study an organization like military or uniformed organization. Okay. Now, these uniformed organizations, police, prison, military, etc., they have their own, it's a very closed society or a closed institutions are there. Normally, by and large, outsiders are not allowed to do research because a lot of things may come out and then it can have a lot of impact on the morale and on the various organization itself. That is where it would not be, normally, by and large, it would not be allowed. In some cases, using your influence, using your, let us say, relationship or other factor, you may be allowed to conduct a study. But normally, under such circumstances, what happens there? They will say that we will tell you, we will give you who are the respondents with whom you can approach and collect the data. So what happens there? When you don't have freedom to collect the data from the you say randomness, when it is not possible, when they give the respondents, now it may be possible that all respondents are keyed in. Do not say anything against our organization. Give a projection that everything is fine. So what happens now? You are totally not aware of this particular factor. You are first time conducting the research and you find that there is no deviation, there is no difference in the opinion at all. Is that true then? Okay, so this is where investigator skills becomes an important factor. Can I blindly accept the data that comes in as it comes? Okay, now again, because of this, now you collect the data through Google Drive. How much you can rely on the data that is being collected from the Google Drive is concerned. So this is where the investigator skills becomes an important factor. Then complexity in data analysis. Okay, so what are the different ways in which the data has to be analyzed is a factor. How much of quantitative and qualitative analysis may have to be made use of is a factor that need to be taken into consideration. More is not always better. Now look at this particular factor. So probably when I, even in the absence of, let us say, multi-method also, at the time of, during the process of research, at two phases of your research, researcher would be stuck. Okay, one is at the time of preparing the synopsis, because he or she is starting the research, and a lot of enthusiasm, motivation would be there. And that's where you want to say, why I can't study this variable, why I can't study this aspect also. So a lot of things you want to include. That is where and your guide would be saying it is not possible, leave out. So this is where at one time it becomes difficult. Later on, while writing, while discussion of the result also, there is a lot of things that can come in, especially in social science. As well, sometimes I was giving an example, making a point that when you have a lot of demographic data, whether to include, do the analysis based on each one of these demographic variable, etc. So that's this. During the normal research also, at these two phases, individual or the researcher will have a difficulty, will be stuck how to progress. Now imagine here, when you have multiple methods that are used, then you have a lot of information and it becomes very difficult for you to make a meaning out of that particular factor is concerned. So this is one of the limitation of the triangulation is concerned. Now, some of the precautionary measures that you may have to make use of, consider while doing a triangulation. They are, first one, define your research question. So clearly you define, determine appropriateness, whether the method that you make use of is appropriate for this or not. Review your literature. Review of literature will help you. And why single method is not adequate, you should justify, and clear about the focus. So if you can concentrate on these 5 points, probably the your approach or you're using a multiple method would be more useful. So triangulation, in conclusion, triangulation is an important research strategy, but should be approached with reason and sound judgment. So if you know the reason why you are doing it and use an appropriate sound judgment, then only triangulation would be more, let us say, useful and more appropriate. So I think with this, I will close. I know there are a lot of observations that are made in the chat. I will go through, or you can also ask questions with regard to this particular presentation. Okay? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for your insightful talk. Now, I request participants to post questions if they have any questions in the chat box. Sir, we have a question from one of the participant, and the question is, how can triangulation can be used in policy and legislative development?
Okay.
Legislation development, yeah.
Okay, okay. Now, say, for example, when you're talking in terms of policy is made now, or even say, for example, when you talk in terms of IPC and CRPC itself. So what are the factors that was necessary? Say, for example, when you're talking in terms of CRPC. Now, latest trend that we find in Western jurisprudence is, say, for example, when you're talking about victimology and penology is concerned. Now, suppose, for example, one of the logic behind this penology, say, for example, in a underdeveloped or a developing country, is concerned, a person commits a crime, let us say, for example, a murder. Okay. Now, this cause of murder may be at a one particular emotional state he has committed this particular murder. And as per this, let us say, CRPC, the person who has committed the murder is, let us say, convicted and imprisoned for life term. Now, that is one particular factor. Now, when you talk in terms of the reality, there would be by putting this man, who is the sole bread earner or breadwinner of that particular family, is put to difficulty, and the victim's family is also being totally affected by putting this man into the. So, is there a need for us to look into these aspects when you are talking, when you are bringing about a change in the legal system, etc. is concerned? Now, suppose, for example, when you talk in terms of, let us say, legal aspects, say, for example, Industrial Dispute Act, okay, or even Employee State Insurance Act, etc., etc. Now, with the technological component that is coming in, AI and ML coming in, whether those labor laws are more appropriate, to what extent that is more relevant now. So, if suppose, for example, if you have a cyber crime, economic crimes that are there, now, is there a need for you to? There is a need for you to look into the newer ways of detecting or understanding this particular phenomenon. Okay, so that is where the multi-method will help us in these sort of field of research also.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Hope that is clear for Ragini. Yeah. Uh, may I request other participants, if you have any questions, please drop it in the chat box.
I think I can find there are 9 chats that are there. I don't know.
No, so those are all not queries.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. Yeah, there are no queries, sir. Noted.
Okay.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
Uh, so, Nowadays in research, the qualitative data analysis is used in a large scale compared to quantitative
Yeah.
research. So, what
Right.
is your observation on that, sir? And what do you think the reason for it, for reason for the
Okay.
same? So, how
Okay.
you can, yeah,
Okay. See, when you say qualitative,
yeah,
the reason for an increase in qualitative research is, the real reason is that nobody has time to collect the data, empirical thing. So when you have a questionnaire, when you want to interview, so what happens is nobody has time. That's one aspect. So empirical study depends upon the sample size.
yes,
So sample size tend to depend upon the number of units of sample which you collect. So when you have a difficulty for that, one way of would be smaller sample size. So smaller sample size, it is possible. If you take a smaller sample size, qualitative research becomes an important factor. But in reality, what happens is, though you use qualitative method, the skill that is required for doing a qualitative research is much more. Until unless the researcher equips himself or herself with the skill of doing a qualitative research, then what happens is the quality of the research that is being conducted on a small sample, without this, that is where the multi-method becomes an important factor. In
yes.
qualitative research, only one particular method is used, not
Mhm.
other methods. So that blending of others also becomes an essential factor.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, there are no other queries, I think.
Okay.
Uh, Now, I request Dr. Murlidhar sir to say a few words
Uh,
about the
yeah, yeah.
term. Yeah.
Sir, very good evening, sir, Professor Ashok, sir. And it was a wonderful experience, and it was a very good learning experience for me, especially. And the
Okay.
session was very thought-provoking, opening up different dimensions of a mixed method of research, both qualitative and quantitative. The relevance, applicability, and methodology to be adopted was very lucidly explained by you, sir. Every time I listen to you, it's a altogether new experience. And some of the concepts are, you made it so simple that even I had a lot of understanding and clarity on various concepts of your presentation, sir. So thank you very much. And we look forward for many more such sessions, and especially the budding researchers and young researchers who are on their journey in the process of research. They have gained a lot of insights with regard to the mixed method of conducting research. So thank you very much, sir. And it was a wonderful opportunity for all of us. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
So there is one more question.
Okay.
One second, I just can't see this. Both qualitative and quantitative data collected, how to decide on the sampling size, sir? The question is not clear.
Okay. Okay. No, that's what I said. So if you start with, let us say, quantitative research, so there is possibility that, there are certain formulas, there are certain ways in which you determine the sample size. Okay. In quantitative research, the sample size, it is possible for you to use that. In qualitative research, depending upon the research objective, okay, if it is a case study, how much of cases you should take. If it is a focus group discussion, how many focus groups you should take. So that's a factor. So in qualitative research, the emphasis is more on in-depth understanding of a particular phenomenon. That's where a small size becomes an important factor. What is that small size depends upon your research problem or the research objective is concerned. Okay. Whereas in quantitative research, it is easy for you to determine what should be the sample size, because when you're talking about quantitative research, you are expected to do quantitative verification of the data or statistical treatment. And in order to, let us say, subject the data for statistical analysis, certain minimum number becomes an essential factor. And that's where you determine the sample size for the quantitative research is concerned.
Yeah, I think there are no more queries, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, to the session. I thank Professor S Ashok for his wonderful and insightful talk. And I also thank Dr. Murlidhar sir for your presence and your valuable feedback on the session. Yeah, and I would like to thank all the participants for your presence in this session. And yeah, I think